Each month, $3 supporters at Patreon and Subscribestar get to ask me anything, and $5 supporters can give me a shout-out. So let's look at the questions supporters asked in April, and if you'd like to ask a question for this month, the links are below. Let's start over on Patreon, where Darth Vega asks, is Monero actually truly anonymous? I guess it's about as anonymous as you're going to get for the time being. Just keep in mind, it's not security, it's obscurity. It uses what's known as ring signatures. Every transaction needs to be signed by the person authorized to spend the money. In other words, who has access to the private key. In a regular blockchain, in addition to the network itself verifying that the signature works, it's also visible to anyone who wants to analyze the blockchain and trace the money. Ring CT works by adding in a lot of stealth addresses. The ring operates on the sender's address, and the stealth addresses operate on the recipient's address. You put in your address as the sender, and then you choose a number of other addresses as well. Obviously, none of those other addresses are actually authorized to send the money, but only someone with access to the true transaction, in other words, the sender and the recipient, can see that. You sign one of these inputs, but the way a ring signature works, only one of them has to be valid. Anyone else can validate that the signature works and knows it's not a double spend and so on, but can't tell which of the inputs is the real one. There's also a bit of clever math they use to hide the amount being spent. Likewise, you have the real output, the actual recipient, and the others are decoys. The actual recipient can verify the transaction and receive the money. The rest are invalid and, of course, can't be claimed by anyone. But no one outside of the participants in the transaction can see that. Of course, no matter what, you're not going to be anonymous to the recipient, so if you're sending it to someone who's been compromised, they can out you, but only regarding the transactions you made with them. In short, don't rely solely on it for 100% anonymity, but it's a good tool in the arsenal. For example, there's a possibility that someone might be able to trace your IP address if they catch you in the act of making the transaction. So you can connect your Monero wallet using Tor, for example using the Orbot app on Android. And what about things like CoinJoin for Bitcoin? CoinJoin, which is also private send on Dash, is a way of mixing coins with other people who want to send money in a way that makes it difficult to know who's sending money to whom. So you want to send a certain amount, and so do two other people. The server takes these transactions and randomizes the inputs and outputs so that the recipients don't match up with who they were originally sending the money to. That's just one mixing round. Generally, there'll be a number of these, usually 8 or more, 16 if you want really good privacy, although that'll take longer and increase the transaction fees. So that first round will go back into your wallet and you do it again for another round. And generally, they'd be broken down into discrete amounts like 10, 1, 0.1, and 0.01 to hide it further. Basically, it's like if everyone threw their money into a big pile and then randomly took out the same amount of money they threw in. It makes it very difficult to trace. With Bitcoin and other such coins, this is generally done via a server, but since the server can see everything that's going on, you have to be able to trust it. But with Dash, each individual mixing round for each individual amount is done by a separate masternode, determined pseudo-randomly and managed by your wallet. So there's no place in the Dash network that can break down all your mixing rounds and trace you. To encourage use, the transaction fee is only applied to 10% of the rounds, saving you money. Just keep in mind that, like Monero, this is probabilistic. Someone who's really determined might be able to figure out if they have enough additional information about who you might be sending money to and how much. And again, for additional privacy, you should take other measures like connecting through Tor. Alright, next up, DeltaWolf asks, I know you're not a fan of governments deliberately selling weapons to another nation's military, often at taxpayers' expense, but what about individual weapons companies doing so? Whether it's companies or individuals or whatever, it doesn't really change the ethics of it much if they're giving it to a government. It's still supporting a violation of the NAP. Now, if they're giving it to private individuals and companies who are independent of government, that's a different thing entirely. Give it to the people of Ukraine and give it to residents of Donbass for personal defense. Or, just to not take sides, give weapons to the Russian people so they can defend themselves from their horrible government. All good. Good example being that Keltec store in Florida that voluntarily sold small arms to the Ukrainian army simply because they support Ukraine in the war. Now, if they'd sold them to Ukrainian individuals or businesses to protect themselves, that'd be a different matter, even smuggling them in. Granted, there is an issue that many weapons manufacturers, especially the ones in Europe, Russia, and Asia, are either government-owned or heavily government-controlled, but what about privately owned manufacturers? Regardless of which side you take, you have to agree non-government persons and groups should be allowed to trade property with whomever they want to, correct? With individuals, groups, and businesses, yes. But again, anytime you deal with any government, you're participating in a violation of the NAP. Sid Padmanaban asks, what, in your opinion, should the U.S. government do if, God forbid, North Korean missiles hit U.S. cities? What would be the best possible response, assuming we know with 100% certainty they fired them on purpose? Well, the best safety is preparation. Harry Brown's idea for a whatever billion-dollar reward for a private company that can develop an effective missile defense system is a good idea and should have been done 20 years ago. After all, we saw it work with things like private space launches and driverless cars. Of course, there's also the diplomatic route, which we saw with Trump's trip to North Korea, works even better. Just make it so they don't want to do it. Any way you can intercept the missiles or prevent their launch needs to be done, but it sounds like your question is what happens after it hits cities and kills people. And this is where the situation gets sticky. The whole reason this works, the whole justification for it, although not justified ethically under the NAP, is mutually assured destruction. Drop bombs on our cities, and we'll drop bombs on yours. So if you don't respond, they and other countries will take it as carte blanche that they can launch nukes on whoever without retaliation. Ethically, you only use whatever means are necessary to put a stop to it. Obviously, take out their missile bases. Most ethically, you could assassinate Kim Jong whoever and anyone else who made the decision, or just take the government down entirely. If you need to make the statement with nukes, drop the nukes wherever they happen to be hiding. But it's not clear you'd need to actually use nukes to do any of that. And indeed, the US military has contingencies for doing so without launching nukes. But not only would you need to retaliate and prevent any further launches, you'd need to maintain the policy that, if any government does that, the response would be that that government and the people who made that decision go away. The fact is, the US military is so big that any nukes we have might be completely irrelevant. The reason North Korea has nukes appears to be because they're such a small country with such a small military, they need some insurance to make sure the US doesn't take out their government. If they try, North Korea launches nukes. For the same reason, it makes no sense that North Korea would launch preemptively. They'd be taking away the only reason the US has for not going in and cleaning house. Unusually, no one asked a question on Subscribestar, but we do have a unique month in that Yurii asked a question on the Discord. How would poorer families pay for education? If a family is poor and has a hard time providing, in a world where there is no form of welfare or public industries. The odd thing is, this is something people generally take care of themselves. When it doesn't happen, it's because government is inhibiting it. Governments either want the people to be uneducated or educated by them so they can indoctrinate them. If they can actually educate themselves, then that's a threat to their entire legitimacy. Because educating ourselves in the first several decades of this country's history is not only what kept us relatively free for so long, it also spawned the abolitionist movement. When charities go around the world offering to help build schools, they don't want to force any one way on the natives, so they ask them what kind of school they want. Invariably, what they describe is what we would recognize as the traditional one-room schoolhouse. And that's how it was for a long time. Communities, not governments, made schools and educated their own children. It was basically like a homeschool co-op that made their own building. What they never seem to want to build is schools like we have now, multi-room, multi-grade institutes based on, let's face it, prison architecture. Or if you live in a fancy area, postmodernist on the outside, brutalist on the inside. They don't want these institutes of indoctrination, where corrupt administrators oversee incompetent authoritarian teachers that can't even protect their students from one lone nut with a gun. And in cases where their government actively shows up to tear down schoolhouses, they get clever. They build the schoolhouse as if it's something else and educate their children in secret. It's never a question of how do you get people to educate their children, it's a question of how can you stop them? The next two questions, how do you stop monopolies and how do you stop exploitation of workers, I feel have been covered to death, so I'll just refer you to my channel's search function. These questions have been dealt with a lot. Plus, you're really only supposed to get one question a month. And that'll do it for another round of questions. Thanks so much for watching. Until next month, comments for the comment god, shares for the share throne. Please hit like, subscribe, and the bell, and go to donate.bogosity.tv to keep me doing what I do. Thanks again, and until next time, stay strong and be free.